Hello and welcome to Grandma's Story Room. Today we are continuing reading The Wild Robot, and today we are going to start on chapter 7. And chapter 7 is called The Wilderness. I've got my cup of hot tea with me, so if you want something to drink while you're listening, you can get it. Animal sounds filled the forest. Chirps and wing beats and rustlings in the underbrush. And then from the sea cliffs, there came new sounds. Heavy, crunching, footsteps. The animals of the forest fell silent. And from their hiding places, they watched as a sparkling monster stomped past them. But the forest was not a comfortable place for Roz. Jagged rocks and fallen trees and tangled underbrush made it difficult for her to walk. She stumbled along, struggling to keep her balance, until her foot snagged and she toppled over a piece of lumber. It wasn't a bad fall. No dings, no dents, just dirt. But Roz was programmed to keep herself in good working order. So she immediately got back on her feet and she quickly began cleaning herself off, and her hands darted around her body, quickly brushing off and picking off every little speck of dirt. So there's Roz in the wilderness. Only when the robot was sparkling again did she continue through the forest. Roz stumbled on until she found a patch of ground that was flat and open and carpeted with pine needles. Now this seemed like a safe place, and safety was all that this robot really wanted. So she stood there motionless, all perfect, lines and angles set against the irregular shapes of the wilderness. Chapter 9, The Pine Cones. Now, if you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. And Roz had been standing in the forest long enough, and a gentle wind whispered through the treetops, and then thunk! A pine cone bounced off her head, and the robot looked down and watched the pine cone roll to a stop. It looked harmless, so Roz went right back to doing nothing. And a few hours later, a gust of wind rushed through the treetops, and then thunk! The robot looked down as another pine cone rolled away, and then a few hours after that, a howling wind tore through the treetops, and it bent trunks and shook branches, and then thunk, 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 thunk. The pine cones began raining down, thunk, thunk, thunk. And Roz felt something like annoyance. Thunk. She quickly scanned the area for somewhere safe. She looked up at the huge, rocky shape that towered above the forest. Chapter 9, The Mountain. Now Roz was stomping her way up the mountain. Dense forest and rocky outcrops forced this robot to zig and to zag and to backtrack. But after an hour of steady hiking, she arrived at the craggy mountain peak. Grasses and flowers and shrubs sprouted from every little pocket of soil. But there were no trees on the top. Roz was finally safe from those annoying pine cones. So she again dusted herself off, then carefully climbed up on a leaning slab of stone to the very highest peak of the entire mountain. And the robot slowly turned her head completely around, which Grandma cannot do. and she saw the ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. And in that moment, Roz learned what you and I have known since the beginning of this story. In that moment, Roz finally realized she was on an island. She looked down and surveyed the island. There she is, standing up there surveying from the very top. From the safety of the sandy southern point, the island grew wider and greener and hillier until it finally jutted up into the rocky cone of the mountain. And in some places, the mountain fell away, leaving sheer cliffs. A waterfall rushed off one cliff, and it fed a river that wound its way through a great meadow in the center of the island. And the river flowed past wildflowers and ponds and boulders and then disappeared into the forest. And blurry shapes suddenly cut through the robot's vision. She refocused her eyes and she saw vultures circling above the foothills. And then she noticed little lizards warming themselves on a distant rock. And a badger peeked out from a berry bush, and a moose waddled through the stream, and a flock of sparrows turned in perfect unison toward the trees. This island was teeming with life, and now it had a new kind of life, a strange kind of life, artificial life. Chapter 10 is very short. It's called The Reminder. I should remind you, reader, that Roz had no idea how she had come to this island. She didn't know that she was built in a factory and stored away in a warehouse before crossing the ocean on a cargo ship. She didn't know that a hurricane had sunk the ship and left her crate floating in the waves for days until it finally washed ashore. She did not know she had been accidentally activated by those curious sea otters. And as the robot looked out at the island, it never occurred to her that she might not belong here. As far as Roz knew, she thought she was home. Let's do one more chapter. Chapter 11, The Robot Sleeps. Roz stood on the peak and watched the sun sink behind the ocean. That's Daisy, by the way. She watched shadows slowly spread over the island and up the mountainside, and she watched the stars come out one by one until the sky was filled with 1,000,000 points of light. It was the first night in this robot's life. She activated her headlights. She had headlights. And suddenly bright shafts of light were beaming out from her eyes and illuminating the whole mountaintop. Too bright, so she dimmed them. Then she turned them off and sat in darkness and listened to the chorus of the nighttime chirps. Chirp, 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 chirp. And after a while, our robot's computer brain decided it was a good time to conserve energy. So she sat and anchored her hands to the rocks. Her nonsensical program switched off, and then, in her own robot way, the robot slept. So the next time we hear this story, we're going to be reading chapter 12, which is called The Storm. Thank you for listening. Until next time.